Hello, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining me. What about you? And special thanks, as always, to my Patreon friends. Thank you all very much for your continuing support. Much obliged, much obliged. Now, it's been an interesting week. It's been a week of bans and exclusion, all sorts of stuff getting cancelled or people asking for stuff to be cancelled. Such as organisers of some LGBTQ festivals who have announced their intention to withdraw invitations to political parties who had banned the sale of puberty blockers to under 18s here. Now, the arguments for and against puberty blockers should never be used as an excuse to exclude. Like, considering it took years to overturn bans on pride parades themselves ever taking place. Now, these actions by these organisers will no doubt be welcomed by the likes of DUP MLA Gary Middleton, who's argued that no public sector bodies should attend these parades. This ban smacks of petulant politics, as not every individual member of these parties who banned the blockers will have supported that move. Indeed, ex-Belfast Lord Mayor Mickey Murray said no one will dictate if he could attend a pride parade, adding that I'm a seasoned rights campaigner who has been at the forefront of every campaign. I mean, what next? Will every spectator at an LGBTQ parade be asked to sign a declaration of unwavering support for everything that LGBTQ stands for before being allowed to stand there? Just as LGBTQ parades have started to become a welcome and indeed welcoming annual event, it seems a minority want to return to the bad old days when their marches went not only unsupported, but worse, totally ignored by the general public. Another ex-Belfast Lord Mayor has been in the news. Yes, Sinn Féin's Martin O'Meara. He views posters warning people of the dangers of paramilitary gangs as stigmatising the community in West Belfast. Now, the posters are part of a campaign to raise public awareness called Ending the Harm, and they were launched last year by the Executive Programme on Paramilitarism and Organised Crime, or EPOC. And while the posters have been erected across the province, indeed, they've been up in North Belfast for quite some time, and us Nordies haven't taken the hump. We have not taken the hump. I suggest that you Westies are tad sensitive, Martin, a wee bit tad sensitive. Now, what Martin seems to be arguing is that West Belfast is Shangri-La. It's a place apart and utterly devoid of any paramilitarism or criminality. Dead on. Now, I have to admit this. I admired Marty's attempts to reach out to all communities during his tenure as Lord Mayor, though I would question some of his decision-making during that time, such as the occasion when he attended the opening of a park at the top of the Shankill Road. On that occasion, but for the intervention of dozens of police officers, Martin would have ended up underneath one of the newly planted trees in same park. The reality is paramilitary gangs no longer recognise old sectarian boundaries. And the proliferation of drug dealing and its attendant misery in West Belfast bears witness to that reality. So rather than stigmatising, these posters could only be seen as offensive to those who are completely out of touch with the day-to-day reality of people living in communities such as West Belfast. I'm not saying that's Marty. Because Marty, I've got a soft spot for. I think he's a decent spud. I do think he's a decent spud. And he's very forward-thinking. And he is very inclusive. But a wee bit sensitive. I think in this one, Marty, you're a wee bit sensitive, son. You're a wee bit sensitive. Take a lead from us Nordies. More offence and all sorts of no. Well, that's been happening up in Derry. Indeed, the Everglades Hotel has been condemned for hosting a show by professional offender Katie Hopkins. Now, part of a tour she has across Ireland, I think it's maybe 6 or 7 gigs. Let's not call it a tour. You understand? It's 5 or 6 or 7 gigs in hotels. This is Mickey Mouse shite. Anyway, Hopkins is advertising it as a stand-up comedy tour. And now the Derry branch of the Ireland Palestinian Solidarity Campaign have called for people to email the hotel and demand the cancellation of this event. Indeed, the group has helpfully prepared a pre-written email for people to send to the hotel outlining some of Hopkins' many offensive statements. I'm sorry, people, but all this group will have achieved is free publicity for this odious, obnoxious waste of sperm. Hopkins is a bottom feeder in the putrid wasteland of the internet. Yet I still believe that cancelling her is wrong. It's counterproductive, and it's the cowardly way out. Hopkins and her ilk thrive off such a reaction. She will shriek, cancel culture, wokeism. Who knows, this may even garner her a tweet from Elon Musk, where she'll be applauded and lauded as a martyr on the altar of free speech. I much prefer the old Irish form of protest. Yeah. Let her come and boycott her. Let her have her event, but let her end up standing on a stage with no audience. That would be a much more effective way to attack this narcissistic, don't start me, Staying with comedy, but this time with a real comic, there has been uproar after Peter Kay had 2 hecklers removed from a show he had in Manchester. Now, one of the hecklers, a woman called Maya Curran, well, she was so humiliated. She was so humiliated by being asked to leave that she went straight on to national TV to attack Peter Kay. Now, I can speak on this because I had the pleasure of opening for Peter at one of his first ever shows in Belfast. It was down in Custom House Square, and it was a big tent, and it was a great show. It was a brilliant show. And I found him to be a lovely man whose comedic genius was matched uniquely by a touching humility. I remember I walked into the dressing room and he was sitting in the corner of the dressing room with a wee notebook going through his notes going, this is all shite. Now, he just finished his first ever series of Phoenix Nights, so while he was well known, he had yet to become the biggest stand-up comic in the country, or any country, right? So on that particular night, when I opened for him, I did quite well. Have to say, I done quite well. And I came off stage and Peter joked, it's all right for you. You're a local. Now, I did point out to him that the 1,000+ people out there, well, they hadn't come to see me. They'd come to see him. And of course, when it came his turn to go out, he did one of the most brilliant stand-up shows I've ever seen, ending off with a well-deserved 10-minute standing ovation from the audience. So the issue of hecklers is different. It's different dependent not just on the comic, but on the venue. Now, I've compared clubs all over the place. I compared a club in Belfast for 20 years. And I've had just about every heckle you can imagine hurled at me. Now, in my case, I love them. I like that interaction. But, and this is a big but, and it's a big but, there comes a point when the interaction has to stop so you get on with the comedy. Because if it doesn't, then what the audience experiences is a drunk man, usually, not exclusively, but usually a drunk man, shouting inanities and interrupting the show. And before you accuse me of just being a comic defending another comic, let me explain some of the mechanics and logistics of heckling. Now, the largest venue I play is the Ulster Hall. That seats 1,000 people. Now, with that number, when someone heckles, I can still isolate. I can still pinpoint where they are. And more importantly, the rest of the audience will have heard what they have shouted and then will understand my response. And you can have a bit of crack. It's no big deal. Peter Kay was playing the Manchester Arena, which has a 21,000 capacity. There is no way he'd be able to isolate where the heckles are coming from, much less reacting to them or the audience hearing them. Now, so what Peter Kay on the night in question, what he did, he had to balance dealing with the heckler, but not allowing them to spoil the night for the other 299, whatever it was, 1,000 people who'd paid a hefty ticket price to come and listen to him, not to listen to some drunk shouting at him. And I guarantee you, If the audience had been canvassed at the end of the show, not one of them would have been critical of his decision to have the hecklers removed. Indeed, as for the hecklers, I have no sympathy. If they'd kept their mouths shut like everybody else in the audience, they'd have been allowed to stay. Better still, and this is the bottom line, if they genuinely think they're that funny, then rather than rudely interrupting a professional comic doing his job, let them have the balls to go along to one of the many comedy clubs, get up onto the stage and try to do it themselves. Now, personally, I only have one show remaining in this year's tour in the Ardone Theatre in Enniskillen, me and Mr. Terry McHugh, this coming Saturday, the 22nd of February. That's the end of the tour. So, if you feel inclined to get a wee heckle, if you want to come and heckle me, be my guest. But be forewarned, I've been dealing with hecklers for decades. Not only will you not win, but I promise you, I will humiliate you so badly, you'll be praying that security come to take you away. It's always one of the regular questions comics get asked. You always get asked. People will ask you this when they're interviewing you. Well, what was your hardest ever gig? Now, thankfully, I haven't had too many. I've had a few. Any comic who says they haven't had a bad gig just doesn't gig that much. But I haven't had really that many. And when I've been asked in the past, I've invariably told an innocuous enough story about the night I played a bar in England, which I didn't know was full of British soldiers who just returned from a tour of Belfast. Let's just say I was not well received. I just about got out alive. But that wasn't my hardest ever gig. No. My hardest ever gig was one I did on the 15th of August, 1998, the day of the Omagh bomb. That evening, I'd been booked to perform in the Stand Comedy Club in Newcastle upon Tyne. And my routine that day was normal enough for a stand-up comic on the road. I'd arrived by plane. I'd got in on a bus into the town centre, and then I got a taxi out to the B&B close to the club where I was staying that night. Dumped my bags in the B&B and went out to find something to eat before the show. On arriving back at the B&B, I noticed that I'd missed a couple of messages, texts from my girlfriend. Them days, it was just them Nokia phones. There was none of this fancy stuff. And she'd asked if I'd heard the news about a bomb in Omagh. I hadn't. So there was this wee small TV in the B&B room I was in that turned it on. And just about every television station was covering the unfolding disaster. It was very clear the destruction and death of this atrocity was of a different magnitude, even by the standards of 30 years of the Troubles. What made it all the more obscene was the fact that the IRA had announced their ceasefire, and everyone had felt that peace had finally arrived. Naturally, I was glued to the television for the next 2 hours, and it seemed that every few minutes things got worse. 29 people died in that attack, with over 200 injured. Innocent men, women, children, and even the unborn lay dead. As what happened just grew into a disaster beyond imagination. I now faced a dilemma. Should I, or more importantly, could I, go on stage that night and do my show? Now, my initial and instinctual reaction was to pack my bag and come home. I called friends in the business and chatted about what I should do. Their opinions seemed to be split right down the middle. Some said I should walk, and others said I had to do the show. Eventually, after a lot of heart searching, I decided that I must go ahead. For I felt that if I didn't, the murdering thugs who had planted that bomb would have in some fashion won. So I went on that night and did my job. And I succeeded in hiding my true feelings as the punters in the club laughed. But inside, I noticed that my initial shock began to turn into a burning anger as I perceived that nobody in that club seemed to care about what had just happened in Omagh. Of course, this wasn't true. These were decent people. It was just that for them, Omagh was as distant a place as Bombay or Timbuktu. I had to fight back an overwhelming urge to scream through the mic, "Have you not seen the news? Don't you realise what's just happened?" Of course, I said nothing. Instead, I politely refused to have the complimentary drinks and walked back to my digs in the rain. And that was, and will always be, the hardest gig I've ever done. Nothing will ever be as difficult. And to this day, I'm still unsure if going on stage that night was right or wrong. What the experience did teach me is that those who'd argue this place is just the same as the rest of the UK are either deluded or deliberately blind to the truth. We are viewed by those on the big island as a place and a people apart. This reality hit me like a punch in the stomach as I walked home that night, past dozens of pubs and clubs full of drunken revelers, totally oblivious to the carnage of the 15th of August, 1998, only a few hundred miles away.